After the completion of the Reconquista in 1492, the final Muslim state in Iberia ended. 800 years of Muslim rule in the peninsula gone, but what about the people? Some left, most stayed. These are the people we are going to talk about today. The last king of Granada, Muhammad XII, signed the Treaty of Granada in 1491. In it, it lies the freedom of religion, so you can practice any religion in peace, the protection of property, allowing for minorities to keep their property without the Spanish stealing it. No one will force any religious conversion, especially towards the Muslims, release all the prisoners, and have the right to bear arms. This system was fair on both sides. Peace lasted for a decade until the first breach of the agreement. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella slowly were taking away the rights of the minorities. First, it came from the Alhambra Decree. In it, it states that Jews will either convert or be deported. This was in 1492. It was thought to have been passed to test the limits of what will take off the minorities, especially the Muslims. Slowly, they were eating up the rights. This decree caused most of the Jewish population to migrate to neighboring Muslim lands in Morocco and Algeria. This also did cause Muslims to get angry that their Jewish brothers and sisters were expelled. The monarchs also appointed Hernando de Talavera as the new Archbishop of Granada. He was known for his moderation and piety. He thought Jesus would never forcefully convert a people or torture them if they didn't want to be converted. Thus, a brief era of peace in Granada all changed in 1499 when the Archbishop of Toledo, Fernando James de Cisneros, began to work in Granada. He disliked the gentle approach of Talavera and began using his harsh approaches. He first got Muslims that didn't want to convert to torture them until they did convert. His efforts were so harsh that when he was talking to Pope Alexander VI, he said that 3,000 Muslims were forcibly converted in one day. Even the people in his own church were afraid that this taking he did break the treaty. This process was part of a larger event called the Spanish Inquisition. Cisneros' approach was to burn as much Muslim texts and Arabic texts as much as possible, and to imprison any Muslim that refuses to convert until they agree to. He also liked to imprison and torture Christians who converted to Islam. They were called heleches. He especially did this to Muslim women to forcefully convert them back to Catholicism. His methods were very cruel to the point where burning people at the stake was a normal event for him. However, in December 18th, 1499, the people had enough. In Albazin, the Muslim quarter of Granada, Velasco de Nuevo, a constable that works under Cisneros, was taking a helecha woman. She was about to get tortured for her Islam. So she yelled to the people that Barrenuevo was going to force her to become Catholic. And this was the last straw. A mob of Muslims came to kill Barrenuevo and save the woman. His assistant was saved by women, and they gave him shelter and aid. Another mob marched to Cisneros' house and began a skirmish, but he escaped. While this is happening, Talavera and Captain General Marqués de Tendela tried to calm the situation down from the Muslim end. After calming the situation, the Muslims had to give up their weapons and hand over Barrenuevo's killers, to which they were swiftly executed. Then Cisneros traveled to Seville and lied about the revolt, to the point where it became the problem of the Muslims, not him. However, as this new rule wasn't going well for the Muslims, they escaped to the Alpuera mountains. While the city did calm down, the revolt spread to the countryside in the nearby Alpujarra mountains. In this countryside, the Christian rule was way less enforced, so a revolt could easily take place. The Muslims were extremely disappointed that the district of Albazin was fully Christian now. This event marked the beginning of the first rebellion of the Alpujarra mountains, which lasted from 1499 to 1501. King Ferdinand led thousands of soldiers to end this revolt, yet it wasn't an actual rebellion. It was just a group of Muslims who were angry about the new conversion laws. This unorganized revolt made it easy for King Ferdinand to quell the Muslims easily by conquering one small region after another, officially ending that revolution. The Muslims who were captured were declared Christians, and if they still resisted, they would have been executed in the name of God. One such event was in Al-Andalus, where an army under Louis de Beaumont executed 3,000 Muslim prisoners. While the women and children were hiding in the masjid, they were blown up. In another incident, the Muslims lost in Villafeke. The men were killed, the women were taken as slaves. And in Najjar and Guejar, Sahara, the men and women were both killed and the children were forced to be brought up as Christians. On March 16th, 1501, Captain Alonso de Aguilar attacked the Muslims in Sahara Bermaja, expecting it to be an easy battle. Yet, to his surprise, the Muslims were much more powerful and they wiped out the entire army, including the captain. Only after this did King Ferdinand call for a peace resolution. If anyone had 10 gold dobles, they would gain their freedom. The rest would either have to leave Granada or be forced to be baptized. Even after all the issues Cisneros caused, he got a promotion as Grand Inquisitor. The newly baptized Muslims were called Nuevo Cristianos, or Conversos, or Moriscos. They were Christians on the outside, but still Muslims on the inside. The monarchs succeeding King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella continued the persecution of the Muslims in Spain. For the next couple of decades, the Spanish would hunt down anyone who was secretly practicing the old religions of Judaism and Islam, and this was the era of fear and distrust. Two decades later, in 1526, Charles V passed a new law to stop any Morisco, which is a new Christian, from practicing any Moorish practices. This meant to stop practicing Islam in secret. The new restrictions were to ban the use of Arabic, stop wearing Muslim styles of clothes, and other prohibiting laws. Most mosques were converted to churches or demolished. The Moriscos were punished for not attending church on Sunday. They're forced to learn the Lord's Prayer, Ave Mary, the Creed, the Ten Commandments in Latin, and the children had no other way of life, so they were basically true Christians. Only hope for the Moriscos was that they could pay off the rule, and King Charles V actually accepted this payoff. Yet this was not an option 40 years later. The new Archbishop of Granada was paranoid that the Moriscos never truly left Islam. So this caused the Royal Bishops' Conference of Granada in 1565. The conference agreed to replace the persecution with repression. The new law was named the Pragmatic Sanction of Granada. This meant destroying anything Muslim, the clothes, language, buildings, etc. And every Morisco will be surveyed every Friday, Saturday, and public holiday. This was to ensure that they don't read the Quran or do anything Muslims would do. If their homes were too clean and if they didn't drink wine or eat pork, then they knew you were a Muslim in secret. The children were sent to Old Castile to be educated in the Catholic rituals and to forget their heritage, and they were only forced to speak in Castilian. There also was a movement of old Christians from Castile moving to become neighbors of the Moriscos as a secondary wave of surveillance. The Moriscos tried to revoke this law, but King Philip II would not remove it at any cost. Francisco Nuez Mary, a Morisco leader, wrote a letter talking about the injustices caused by the Spanish. In his letter, he wrote, "Our situation is getting worse day by day, and we are being abused in all forms. It is done by judges and officials. How can people be so disenfranchised? Do they have their own native language? Egypt, Syria, Malta, and other places have their people who speak, read, and write Arabic as much as we do, and are Christians just like us." In 1561, The king and his bishops were afraid of a new connection between the Moriscos and the Ottoman Empire, and this caused the king to ban the trade through the Silk Route, the maritime way. And this was the last straw for the Muslims. The Moriscos slowly began to move all into the old Moorish quarter of Granada and make secret meetings in the Albiasan. In 1567, the Moriscos started to prepare for the revolt. They collected weapons, food, and other important products in their caves. On September 17, 1568, they chose their leader for the rebellion. But the rebellion officially began on December 24th in a village called Benzar, located in the Lesseran Valley. Muhammad ibn Umayyah was given multiple names, such as Umayyah Fernando de Cordoba y Valor, and he was chosen to be the king due to his lineage, which goes back to the old Khalifas of Cordoba. He dressed in purple to show his importance, and black to show the Khalifa's lineage of the Umayyads. He took the name Ibn Umayyah, which is a corrupted version of Arabic and Spanish combined. Many places in the south of Spain, such as Orgivia, Porqueira, the district of Jubilas, and other smaller villages all across the Alpujarra, followed Umayyah. They first took the small Spanish garrison under Hisn al-Qaudi or Qadir. The next day, one of Umayyah's deputies entered Albiasan with 100 munafiqs, which are a certain type of outlaws. They were announcing the Adhan to signal to the people that the rebellion has begun. There were supposed to be 8,000 men that entered Granada, but due to the heavy storm, it halted this. Subsequently, this caused the inhabitants of Granada to be wary of joining such a small army. It also caused the assault of Alhambra to be cancelled as well. Hisn was angry by this, so he just left. He left to the countryside to regain his support, and the rebels captured 3,000 Spanish soldiers who were known to torture the Muslims, and the Muslims used their own tactics against them. After a couple days, Umayyah called an end for their revenge. He made his new army regroup and await his orders. Yet, Farlex ibn Farex was a bit of trouble and unwilling to stay in line. Now what to do next? The moderates, who were the townspeople, wanted just the suppression of the pragmatic sanction versus the radical countrymen who wanted to make their own Islamic emirate again. And there's a third side who just wanted to join the Ottomans and conquer Spain completely. This rebellion, without a goal, would have died, and it kinda did after 10 days. They couldn't reconquer Granada, they let the prisoners go, and they retreated to the countryside of the Alpujarra mountains. One such prisoner was Marquess of Modenjar. Once he was freed, he came back a week later to stop this weakened rebellion. He made it all the way to the mountain, and they rebuilt the broken bridge that the Moriscos destroyed when they had to leave the Lesseran Valley due to the heavy snow weather. The first official battle began, yet they lacked the weapons, so it was difficult for the Moriscos to defeat the Spanish army. Modenjar didn't want to take any chances and executed all the prisoners. He did spare the people who weren't involved in the rebellion. A month after this disastrous defeat, the Moriscos regained themselves and reformed an army. Sadly, Umayyah's army was no more than just a couple hundred men. And once King Philip heard the mercy that Modenjar gave, he was angered. Modenjar was being too generous, and he needed to kill every single Morisco, innocent or guilty, to end this war. So he appointed a new person, a Marquess of Los Valles, a Lord of Murcia, and he was known for his ruthlessness. The Muslims called him the demon with the iron fist. He made his own private army and marched to the Alpujarras from the northeast. Once he passed the town of Chantafili, or Felix, it was a Morisco town, and the Moriscos were afraid of a small Spanish army coming past them, so they threw stones at them to defend themselves. Unfortunately, Marquez executed every single person, including the animals, and beheaded the cats. It was known as the Hell of Massacres. Some mothers chose to throw themselves and their children into the ravine that maybe they could save themselves from the massacre. All over the south of Spain, Motinjar, who wasn't being as merciful, and Marquez were destroying people, villages, and fields. The militia of Granada joined in and executed 150 Moriscos, including the father of Homaya. The prisoners were fighting with the little objects they had, but to no avail. The actions of the Spanish didn't demoralize the Moriscos, they only fueled their desire for revenge and freedom. Now it was the all or nothing situation. It was either martyrs or victors. The Spanish army sacked Valor. The army had an offer. They'll execute all the men and keep the women as slaves. As they were giving the offer, Homaya's forces attacked. The Spanish were surprised. Nevertheless, the Moriscos killed 1,000 men. After this first victory, many Moriscos joined the army of Homaya, up to 25,000. They heard rumors that there might be even a revolt in Oranchos, Portugal, and even Valencia. And in the land between Ronda and Malanga, the revolt was already happening. The peasants took the weapons, while Al-Haren el Grande, his Spanish garrison, were drunk in the night. In this era, the Moriscos finally got foreign allies. They got thousands of volunteers from North Africa to join the Morisco army, and even Ottoman military advisors helped to organize the army and make it more effective. In Algiers, they said if a prisoner wanted freedom, they would join the Al-Andalus War. On the shore of Al-Andalus, North African soldiers kept giving weapons to the Moriscos. Yet, the Hafsid dynasty betrayed their Muslim brothers and joined the Spanish, sending 4,000 volunteers. And the Spanish had two major issues: corruption within the crown and division within the army. In the spring of 1569, Homaya sent a major assault to Marquez's camp, who barely defended himself in his camp. Since Homaya got an expert military advisor, the Spanish were slowly having to go on the defensive. Now Homaya's army were conducting guerrilla warfare, which further weakened the Spanish army, similar to the Vietnamese tactics in the Vietnam War. The Spanish even had to leave Granada for a short while. In the summer, this was when Homaya had the most power. His army took the city of Porchena. The Spanish were so afraid at this point, they even had to hide their Protestant revolution in the Netherlands from public knowledge. France was enjoying these revolts against the Spanish, and Queen Elizabeth I even gave some weapons to Morocco to indirectly help the Moriscos. The Spanish were afraid of a large Ottoman invasion. However, the Ottomans chose to invade Cyprus instead of help their Muslim brothers in Al-Andalus. The Spanish moved their battalions of Terlecos from Italy to Spain, and they were the best warriors they have. King Philip even moved his court to Cordoba to have more control over the situation. He appointed his brother Don Juan of Austria to lead the battles. It was announced that Spanish soldiers would have Camp Franco as a rape, plunder, and enslavement camp for the soldiers to do whatever they want to the Moriscos. The Spanish expelled all the Moriscos from Castile and executed all the men and kept the women as slaves. Don Juan wanted to finish the revolt quickly to cement his name as the victor of the crusade instead of as an illegitimate child. There was a rumor that Homaya might have done some type of affair to a woman, without valid evidence. Yet his cousin Abd Allah, or Ibn Abu, strangled Homaya to death in a makeshift palace called Lujar de Andarax. Ibn Abu was a warlord, but he was good at war. He sent his army to attack Orgava's garrison. That was the last battle the Muslims won, and on December 24th, 1569, Don Juan left Granada to the countryside. They scouted, robbed, and killed Moriscos. Galara was the beginning of a major Spanish offensive. For weeks, the Spaniards couldn't breach the walls of Galara. There was Ottoman engineers and all the volunteers protecting this palace. Wave after waves of enemies kept attacking Muslims, but to no avail. It was only after the Spaniards weakened the support of the fortifications by drilling under the walls that the Spaniards finally won. Now the Spanish had to fight urban warfare inside this city, and it took 9 hours because of all the traps and highly guarded doors and houses, and every person had a weapon. But Don Juan slaughtered all the survivors of the battle, all 5,000 men, women, and children. After a couple hours, he stopped the bloodshed only because his troops were angry that they couldn't use these captives as slaves. Then he razed guerrilla to the ground and salted the fields. However, military supplies stopped arriving once the Spanish blockaded the Andalusian coast. One after another, each stronghold was reconquered by the Spanish. In the spring of 1570, there was 10,000 rebels with weapons, but they were all starved due to the fields burning. The Muslims were sent to the mountains and eventually found and executed, and their families were sent to the slave markets of Seville or Lisbon. In the autumn of 1570, the Spanish announced that they will deport all Moriscos to different parts of Spain to weaken them. The military lied to the Morisco population, stating that if they leave now, they will return after the war was over. A lot of the Moriscos believed them, so they left without protest. Only in Tarax did the Moriscos defeat the Spanish, only for themselves to burn their own city and retreat to the mountainside. It was just like the Trail of Tears. As the Moriscos were sent away from their native homes, never to see them again, they were starved, it was bloody, it was terrible. The deportation process only took a couple of weeks to be completed. The outcome was deserted Morisco ghost towns. The trail was very inhumane. They had to walk 15 miles every single day in the cold. They were barely given any clothes. Many families died or were separated. At least 1 out of 5 people died of hunger or typhus. As they were marching, their bodies were just thrown on the road. Some escaped to Morocco, others joined Monofis, but most died or were forced to forget their heritage of Islam. Yet, this wasn't enough. Muslims who escaped were hunted down. Moriscos who stayed in the Alpujarras mountains were stuck. They couldn't get food because of Don Juan's chain of fortifications around the mountains. The Spanish created divisions within the Muslims by sending fake messages from Al-Fuakis calling for their surrender. Hernando el-Habiki accepted the surrender, but Don Juan killed him on the spot. In the summer, new groups of volunteers came from Algeria, specifically Algiers, to boost the morale until the winter where all resistance ceased. Ibn Abu chose to surrender, then he changed his mind. Yet, news of this came to 4,000 volunteers who were traveling from Algiers, but once they heard the news, they went back. The rebels now were just people wandering to find food, and it was in the month of Ramadan. Ibn Abu was betrayed by his own men, who turned to bounty hunting for the crown. Ibn Abu had his skull smashed into the rock when he was fighting against this bounty hunter. And the bounty hunter carried the body of Ibn Abu to Granada and impaled him on the stake. And his head was cut off from his body and laid there for a year to stand as a symbol of the end of Muslim rule. Don Juan had a new title of Savior of Christendom. Now the province of Granada was nothing more but abandoned and destroyed mess. This was the last Muslim revolt against the Spanish for their terrible treatment of the Muslims of Al-Andalus. The timeline of this video reaches from 1492 to 1571, but the story does go on, but it goes beyond the scope of this video, so I'll end it here today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video.